So everyone who's watching, we have swum the seas, we've pulled cables, we've met each other at the exchanges, we've looked at the power challenges, we've looked at the power challenges in the micro detail as well, in the hardware and so on. Now we're going to move into the section where the consumers get access to all those services. And this section is really all about access network technologies and the evolution in that space. So, Mark, are you out there?
Yes, absolutely.
I preempted you, Mark.
Been cracking so far.
I preempted you because we need to get our word from our sponsor on the panel. And we have Nick in Synamedia. Nick, are you out there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Let me put your sponsor off you just to tell us a little bit about that for a second. Go for it.
Yeah, so Synamedia is a company that was the result of a divestiture from Cisco, where Cisco basically divested its video activities. It's a company with a strong foundation based on companies that were acquired by Cisco in the past 15 years, like Scientific Atlanta and NDS and some others like Barco. We have a couple of divisions, and one of them is video network. We are basically specialized or provide solutions for distribution, processing, and delivery. Distribution means primary distribution from content provider to service providers, which is an end-to-end solution with distribution over satellite networks or over IP networks with products like encoding, muxing, scrambling, and control, access control. Then we have our processing, which is all types of video processing for service providers with complete workflows for broadcast and OTT delivery, with encoding, muxing, origination, packaging, and name it. So anything end-to-end we can provide. And then lastly, which is the topic of today, is our delivery component, which is an on-prem CDN, so an on-net CDN with multicast capabilities where that would make sense. As I mentioned, strong foundation means a big customer base. Some of those are mentioned here on the slide. Many customers around the world, and also lots of partnerships to complete our product line where needed.
Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Nick, for the intro. I would like to invite the other ones to just to say a word about what they're doing. Thomas, are you there?
Yes, actually, I'm here. You should hear me, and now maybe you even see me.
Yes, now we see you.
Thank you, Mark and colleagues, for the invitation. What I'm doing, I work for Qualcomm. I hope everybody knows Qualcomm. If not, we basically are the largest chipset manufacturer, provide chipset and technologies for predominantly mobile devices. But nowadays, we get much broader in what we supply because I mean our history is mobile, right? And so basically a lot of the 5G technologies apply not only to mobile cell phones but to a wide variety of devices, IoT devices, automotive, and so on. So what I'm working on, I'm working in our QSAO team, which is the Standards and Industry Organization. I do a couple of relationships with other companies to develop standards, develop technologies to get interoperable deployments out there. I think that's mostly it. We can speak a bit more details, but you will get it afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. Thanks. Thanks, Thomas. Matt, are you there?
I have solved the Zoom technology. I am here.
Yes, yes, perfect.
So my name is Matt Levine. I'm the founder, CTO at CacheFly. We are a CDN focusing on helping our customers entertain and educate the world. And we're probably most noted for deploying the first TCP Anycast-based CDN way back in 2002.
Great. Good. I'll start with an interesting one, which was announced in April by Deutsche Telekom. So Deutsche Telekom announced basically that they are going full IP for all their digital TV aspects. That means they gradually want to go to multicast ABR and eventually just do unicast only, which has been in their industry for a couple of other smaller telcos that did this, but now also a big one like Deutsche Telekom is doing this. is this in some degree a kill of multicast? And I'm sure Dom doesn't like that to hear that. I know. Is this a kill for multicast, broadcast, terrestrial, etc., etc.? Nick, what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, I love this announcement because this is really what we've been waiting for. You may know that at Synamedia we've been doing multicast ABR already for quite a while. And what was a bit frustrating indeed, like you say, mostly small operators, which you wouldn't really expect, are using the technology to a certain extent, or smaller operations. It's been a little bit better the last couple of years, or the last year or so, where also bigger operators started investing in the technology. But you know, a big operator like Deutsche Telekom hopefully can really break the dam. You know, that the opportunity starts flowing, and that many larger operators see it as a necessity in order to create scalability. And this is really normal, I would say, especially if you start driving services to the main screen TVs, where we're talking about high bit rates. If you have 1 million people watching the same thing, then the ABR technologies, because they're HTTP based, are really wasteful in the sense that it's 1 million times the same thing that you put over a network. And when you're talking about live, it's the same thing at the same time that everybody's watching at the same time. So having 1 million streams doing the same thing on the network seems not very efficient. And this is then where multicast obviously helps, is to create one stream over the network in multicast, and then in the home, this is back transformed to a unicast for any client that is only aware of an ABR session where it's basically starting an HTTP session based on a manifest and starts downloading the video segments. They can do that much more efficiently because that duplication really happens in the gateway in the home. So you could almost see that the gateway in the home, or even the device in the home, becomes like a mini cache of a CDN, and you fill that cache using multicast. It's a simple way of looking at how multicast ABR actually functions.
And I mean, one of their moves is they want to go full unicast in the end. So if you look at, I mean, they say that it's going to take a long while before they move into that direction.
They could, and we would love that even better, because that means they would need huge CDN capacity, you know, in terabits per second. So we would love to sell that as well. But, you know, if you want to make it efficient, and I would say once you have deployed that whole infrastructure, and also we should not forget DVB is putting quite a bit of effort in standardizing that. So you could maybe expect that in some cases devices will start supporting this directly, which has some interesting properties for a topic that is later on the schedule when we're talking about 5G. Thomas is leading a team there in DVB, can talk about it in more detail, which I'm part of as well, to see how we could leverage multicast as well in a 5G environment, as an example. But certainly, once you have that kind of capability in the home, and there is a gateway in the home that supports it, I wouldn't see why you wouldn't keep using that, even if you have expanded your CDN to go much further than it is today. Of course, multicast is only efficient when you do watch video at the same time. As soon as you start time shifting and so forth, then of course that element becomes less important, and the CDN will have to be able to deliver those kind of capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, talking with operators myself, I already see 30-40% of the traffic being time shifted within telco networks. So I mean, that is a shift that is ongoing anyway. So I think that's
correct.
One of their
but
drivers as well.
It takes time. And you'd be surprised to see that it is only 20-30%. You know, when I've always thought, because I use it a lot, that it is much more people doing it, but ultimately people end up going back to live as much as possible, especially when we're talking about sports or true live events, you know, where there is voting. Then most people tend to flock back to live as quickly as possible. Mostly the time shift is used to skip ads.
Okay. Good. Thomas, one of the things that Deutsche Telekom mentioned was going to HTTP, is that's where the innovation is happening in general. US focusing on standards, et cetera. How do you see that in terms of operating networks and where the innovation is happening on that front?
Well, I mean, it's fine that HTTP is really something that was done that's really old, but it's something that is ubiquitous, right? And what we learned is that you basically, and I mean, CDNs are great. They have basically made all of this possible. where HTTP was not built for streaming initially, but somehow people made it work. And basically making it work, the whole issue is a scalability issue that you easily can roll out. They get a lot of robustness into this, and by having the logic in the client, it helps basically. So it simplifies the whole network. So what's happening obviously is that we have now all of the applications, the web is converging into this direction. All of these endpoints, they speak HTTP. So you reach basically every endpoint reaches HTTP. So now the idea that we had previously, and I go back to Qualcomm times where we, for example, developed media flow to distributed TV. There was a trend in the early 2000s to do kind of mobile TV type of things. Also IPTV kind of was done back then. All of this did not was not really broadly successful. So I know there is still deployments on IPTV, but generally using a technology which allows you to reach every device is great. And what you see now is a separation of basically the service and the distribution platform, right? So and now what we basically having is we developing on this layer that basically where HTTP is like the middle layer, and we're getting better protocol below HTTP, right? There is QUIC, there is ABR multicast, that's all basically feeding from below. At the same time, we get all of the innovation that is basically on top of this, right? But the good thing is that this is transparent between the two endpoints, right? Because all the development below are just improving the quality. All of the developments above give you new opportunities for better services, for enhancements. But you know, the investments are not like crazily high to migrate. It's all like gradual improvements. I think that's the benefit of this HTTP. And I don't see IP the converging layer. I really find that HTTP and the idea of moving content to HTTP was the success that everything got converged. And you get this huge opportunities of developing more in individual pieces, and that's where the standards work on now, right? So they improve around these HTTP as being present.
Great, and Matt, you as being a CDN, what are the lessons that knowing that operators move into that direction as well as being CDNs? What are lessons that they can learn from everything that you guys already have done that they could apply on? I mean, not everything, but a few lessons that I'm sure you have that they can certainly apply in there as well, because you have like a track record of years on this already.
Yeah, I think that's probably that was a prerequisite for them making this announcement, right? Is being able to stream video in the wild across networks over unicast kind of creates a base level of understanding experience to be able to say, okay, now can we do that in a closed ecosystem? And I think there's a couple things in their announcements that are maybe less technology based and maybe more business side. The first you touched on was the time shifting. I think that's key. I think it's probably a signal that at least for them, they're going to want to get out of the hardware game. So there's some overhead in supporting set-top boxes across however many subscribers they have. I think moving to something like a unicast model allows them to go to more of an app model, where if they say, okay, we're planning to be there in 10 years out, we expect every TV to be a smart TV. And guess what? We're not going to have to roll trucks. We're not going to have to employ people. So I think there's a part of it that is outside sort of the base tech ecosystem and might be more of a business strategy decision.
This is driven, yeah.
But, you know, since the announcement, I've been thinking about it. And, you know, the two things that are driving this from my perspective are one, Keck's Law. So multicast as a sort of base need is only around the idea that there's constrained capacity. So it's a solution to a capacity problem. So as the capacity increases and the bit rate stays the same, it's delivering less value every time you double capacity on the network side. And then the flip side is, you know, we're probably seeing providers building their own CDNs. And if you actually build a tiered operator CDN, you've built multicast. So multicast is kind of a tiered packet cache at the network layer. You can think of providers deploying a CDN in a tiered fashion as doing the same thing. So they don't need one single CDN endpoint supporting 2 terabits of video, they need that to feed 10 endpoints, which in turn will feed 10 endpoints, which in turn will feed 10 endpoints. And by the time you're back to the sort of consumer, you've got the same efficiency of bandwidth that you had in multicast in the first place. Now that assumes that the providers are making an investment in non-network equipment on a network level, but I think that's where we're going to see them start to go in terms of edge and that sort of thing. So, I think they have a big advantage over commercial CDNs because it is that closed ecosystem. They can eliminate more variables than we can. But I think I think they're right that that's where the innovation is going to be 10 years out from now. But I really see it as a getting out of having to roll trucks play more than anything else.
This is a good segue into the second topic, basically, in terms of operator CDNs. Nick, for you specifically here, years back, ideas was for telco CDNs to deploy their CDNs and basically offer this capacity to content players and to deliver CDN on steroids, let's put it that way, with higher quality, SLAs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That basically has never really worked, apart from a few exceptions. Now also because operators are also moving into more an aggregation area where they bundle their own TV services, including that of OTTs, which are by definition delivered based on unicast. Is there a new model on the horizon where telco operators, with telco operator CDNs in general, actually can fulfill a hybrid role in terms of delivery to the end users in the end? So one, their own content on one side, and the other way, because it's the same user that's watching either or, also become a gateway for the OTT player to deliver the same type of content. How do you see that? Thank you.
I think it was a little bit different in history, at least that's the way we've seen it, is that the main reason why people started investing in their own CDN was for their own content. So if you look at a Telenet or an LGI or whatever, the CDN that they deploy was really to propagate their own content. So the content that they have the rights to as part of the aggregation of content, like you say, because that's really what operator service providers, be it telco or cable companies, have done mostly. They're aggregators of content, and through some nice application, they make that available to their subscribers. So that was the main reason for doing it. There were some exceptions, specifically on the telco side, where CDNs were probably installed or were installed in the first place to actually to sell capacity to content providers to get to their subscribers in a more, let's say, in a higher quality way. So what I think is happening is that because these investments are bigger, and as you know, you get more and more traffic over HTTP, you do need to expand the CDN capacity. That they're also thinking, well, if you build for the peak and that peak is only used very, very rarely, what do you do with the capacity in the meantime? And then finding more usage for that CDN it makes sense. So trying to do wholesale for the CDN that you have deployed on your own network as an extension to the public CDNs like the Akamai's, Fastly's, etc., it does make sense. And of course, then it's all about, what kind of system could you build in order to make that possible. Some people really say, this is a service that I will provide to content providers, and they just have to tell me if they want to use it, and I'll charge them for the capacity that they're using on my network. Simple model, which is really like the Akamai all-net, if you could call it that, because that's also the way typical CDNs sell their capacity. But also, like you mentioned in your question, there is some standards that could make other models possible as well. But we have to see how that plays out. And so far, I think that model really plays where there is a shared cost that the content provider can actually pay for a CDN that is on net that can be used then by the service provider. So they don't have to pay for installing the caches in their network, but they can make use of them in a way together with the content provider. And it's then a matter of determining who gets what at what given point in time to make this all work. And I think the models are there, especially with some of these open standards that are emerging, like open caching. It doesn't have to be an open standard where the cache is opened up. It could also be some kind of, you could say a CDN becomes a virtual network function, a VNF, and through some orchestration system that can be used by a variety of parties, be it the telco itself or the content provider, leveraging some kind of component there through an orchestration layer, and then of course with some payment scheme behind it. So I think those things could all happen. Not sure which direction it will take. I think it's a matter of us, like, when you supply something like that, you provide the tools to the service provider or to the content provider to make such a model happening, where the investment is shared, so to speak, between the two parties, and that way it becomes less of a burden to expand capacity.
Okay, Thomas, you're big into the 5G stuff, etc. 5G, of course, is on the horizon. They have a promise of delivering high capacity. People are moving more in the mobile side in terms of content consumption in general. Maybe operators need to change on how they do distribution in general. In general, telco operators probably with the operator CDNs need to diverse. I mean, we have unicast as one example, but there are multiple ways of delivery, as you know. If we look at all the different standards that are out there, how can these help operator CDNs move forward, and which standards and standardization bodies could help with this?
I mean, again, a standard is not a solution that you say that's the ultimate deployment. It gives you options that you get multi-vendor deployment. But obviously, based on this, there are considerations in what direction are we going? What is 5G different to what was there before? I mean, 5G is not, it has a couple of aspects of the radio. The radio is different, a bit more efficient, different frequency bands and so on. That is something that you get more or less on top, but there is also an architecture and a service layer on top of this. And what was basically with 4G and LTE, that was great because it spurred all of the mobile video traffic, right? So, but it was more or less just an over-the-top BitPipe app-based, app-centric environment. So, but what happened is that based on this, that there were a collaboration starting between operators, MNOs, and content providers doing certain models. I mean, the best one I know is the binge-on zero rating model, basically where you have certain agreements and you throttle and you identify traffic. So, but what it basically was, it was always the same content, was the same service, it was just basically a hidden way of kind of collaborate and monetize this money. So 5G basically is built to give you more of these tools, so that basically there is open collaboration models between an MNO and a content provider with APIs, but it's not that you change your content. Basically, user plane, all of the data that you distribute is the same, but maybe you get a quality of service, maybe you can differentiate, maybe you have subscriber levels. And so, whereas that was basically unstandardized or more or less specific for every operator, 5G tries to basically attempt to create some framework to put this around. But it's basically from a data distribution, it's really the attempt to not change anything, to really leverage what is done in the CDN unicast-based distribution. But now, I mean, and that's how we get a bit into the multicast. We have also extensions now to support multicast in the network, where an operator can decide on the physical layer, basically on cell population and penetration, to switch between a point-to-point and point-to-multipoint. So these are then optimizations, but they would be completely transparent to the content provider and also to the user. It's just an optimization that is allowed by the MNO. And these type of tools are basically made available, and it allows to do individual optimizations, but also allows this collaboration models between the content provider and the MNO. I leave it at this. Maybe there's a question later.
Yeah. And Matt, one for you then. As a number of different telcos have now announced that they are integrating cloud services like AWS, Google, etc., within their telco networks in general, allowing them to basically move deeper into a telco network. As we all know, these cloud providers also provide CDN services on top. So together with the telcos, they could potentially be a competitor for regular CDNs in that regard. but it could also be an opportunity for you guys to also partner with telcos and move into that direction. How do you see that from your standpoint, Nick?
I think Thomas used a really interesting word that I would stick with, which was collaborate. So when there's a collaboration, everything is possible. When it starts to get more commercialized or vendor sort of vendor client-y, what we have found is one tier below, so the actual content providers, a lot of them, and there's probably some line where, you know, the top X percentile of content providers and the top X percentile of MVNOs or even wireline networks will collaborate together directly.
Yeah.
Regardless
you
of
see this in the IT world as well.
Yeah. So you're sort of talking about, okay, anybody who's not quite at that scale, what happens a tier lower? And what we normally see is a tier lower, people are looking to constrain the number of throats they have to choke. So without the collaboration, you're able to sort of hold one or two or three parties accountable for how your content is being delivered, what the performance is, et cetera. So there's some sort of diminishing returns on the number of relationships you can have relative to your ability to manage them. But to your specific question, I think that's probably where the cloud providers provide an advantage. You know, if you think of Amazon CloudFront being that aggregation layer, so that's still your throat to choke. But in turn, there's now CloudFront CDN edges that maybe are included in your plan, maybe you contract separately, but those are the ones that are pushed down into the telco networks. So I think there's lots of opportunity there. In the short term, I think it will look a lot more like collaboration than anything else, but it opens a door in the medium term time frame for one of those cloud providers to some extent level the playing field. Because right now you only have those top X percent that, you know, have embedded caches that can deliver a quality of service that smaller players can't today. So if anything, I think it might level the playing field for the content providers. And overall, I think that's a good thing for consumers. I think it's a good thing for the evolution of the video industry. So I think that's a win for everybody, but it's early. So it'll be interesting to see how.
Yeah, I know it do. Sure. We know this. I mean, so it's calibration there, especially tier twos, is key here. Basically, that's what you're saying. Basically. Okay. Last question. We have 2 minutes left. So Nick and Thomas, very short for you both. Based on the conversations, homegrown CDNs, as we know it, seems to be dying. Let's put it that way. It's getting too complicated for people to basically build their own operator CDNs. Do you agree with this? And will the fact that homegrown CDNs are getting, let's say, out and we're moving into, let's say, standardized solutions, will that help standardization to be adapting quicker? Nick, very short.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I see that. I wish, to be honest, that this would happen, because this would open more opportunities for us. So probably you're right in some cases. Certainly for smaller operator, that is starting to happen. With the bigger ones, I mean, you called Deutsche Telekom there in the beginning. They do their own stuff, but you know, some of the bigger operators don't. And have never done so. It depends a little bit, I guess, on what the knowledge is and what kind of engineering capacity they have to do this. Standardization, depending on what you mean with standardization, is it really needed to
adoption of standardization? I
think certain standards for sure, like certainly multicast is very useful to have, because then you broaden the scope and make it easier or less risky for people to implement, especially when there is client-side type of technology involved. When you talk about multicast, at least the home gateway or some home gateway device or the receiving device itself needs to have the capability to support this multicast, because ultimately, today multicast is used in a way that the end device is not even aware there is multicast. It's like Thomas was saying, it's really an optimization technology, and the whole thing needs to be transparent end to end. And you know, having standards available to do that certainly makes some of the receiving side of that equation simpler and less risky. The open cache pack, I don't know how much that is needed. I think if you have ways of leveraging installed capacity in other ways, like I mentioned before, make it a virtual network component that is accessible by either the telco, and if they make it accessible outside, then that could be very helpful as well. But yeah, the homegrown thing, I'm not so sure yet it will disappear, but for smaller operators, probably that's certainly happening.
Thomas, very quick, because I know Dom is already trying to ring the bell.
Quick.
On the standardization side.
Yeah. What we see is that everything that basically where you need special equipment is basically always an investment that you need to be very careful. So the question is, do you invest in the special equipment that does something very special, or do you just add more capacity to a CDN, right? And the scale is basically what helps always, that they can use the same infrastructure for many different purposes. So, and I believe that's why these homegrown aspects are more difficult, because how do you get redundancy, robustness into place? If you put it in scale, things get easier, and the rest basically, but there's a lot of innovation around this CDN scale. So that's what it's saying. So you use this basic platform to get reliability, distribution, but then you build around this, and I believe that's where the opportunity. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Matt. I'm giving it back to Dom because I know he's eager to go to the next one.
I don't know how I stayed quiet after half an hour of talk about so much multicast. My favorite topic. I could have talked about bit index explicit replication or interdomain multicast replication, but anyway, we'll leave that for another day. Thank you so much for a deeply engaging panel, one of my favorite topics, and you did it really well. Thank you so much to the whole panel.